Hello friends, welcome to my channel. My name's Bernard. Today I'm going to speak about a very unusual and important person in my young professional life. His name was Rene Morel, and if you recall in a previous video I spoke of Frank Passa, violin dealer extraordinaire in San Francisco. I also spoke of purchasing a beautiful Lupo violin from Frank. Well, I played the Lupo for many years with issues about the response, but the sound was beautiful. I also began to have wolfing issues on the G string, which also manifested on the D string. Keeping in mind that wolves are usually the result of too many overtones in the violin box. Perhaps the violin hadn't been played much for a long time before I purchased it, and now I was playing it for many hours every day. Violins are made of wood and respond to the vibrations of musical tones by the action, the responses loosening up, making the violin theoretically more enjoyable to play. But as the violin loosens up, there are many more overtones, and maybe that was the reason for the wolves that began to appear. So I pondered and pondered about what to do. At that time, I didn't feel confident in the workmanship of any violin luthier in the Bay Area that I knew. So I began to talk with various touring soloists who played with the San Francisco Symphony. One night I spoke with conductor and soloist Sasha Snyder, who loved my Lupo violin. When I explained the difficulties I was having, Sasha said, "Take it to Rene Morel. I love him and he loves me." Such a European expression of friendship. He said, "Have complete trust in him. He will repair your violin and it will be perfect." Rene Morel was the vice president of Jacques Francais Incorporated, a top violin shop in New York City. Rene trained in France before coming to New York City, where he joined other highly talented repairmen, including Frank Passa, in studying with Simone Sacconi. Eventually, he became an important member of both the International Society of Violin and Bow Makers, as well as the American Federation of Violin and Bow Makers. So I got the number, I called Rene, told him of my conversation with Sasha and about my violin. And he said, "Sure, bring it over. We'll have a look at it." A week later, I booked a red-eye flight to New York City with the turnaround later that same day. I was way early there in New York City that morning before Jacques Francais' shop opened. I had taken a bus into the city and was deposited at the Port Authority station just a few blocks away from Morel's workplace. It was early autumn and the temperatures, super cold, surprised me, and I wasn't dressed for that cold. So I grabbed a taxi heading uptown. I was appalled at the cost of such a short drive. And then, on top of it, the driver demanded a tip. He said, "Hey, I went out of my way to drop you in front of the door." Oh my God, that was New York taxi service. That's the way they operated. Probably still do. So finally, I met Rene and showed him my Lupo. He loved the violin and told me the first thing he needed to do was take the top plate off. He teased me about him taking a knife to the violin, gently prying in the seams to release the glue. I told him, "Hey, I trust you. You gotta do what you gotta do." He told me to come back to the shop in a few hours, and then we'd talk about everything. So I went off to the Metropolitan Museum to while away the hours. Later, Rene showed me the violin taken apart and said, "Good news. The soundpost area is fine. We don't touch the top. Still leave it in mint condition, just like new." Thank God for that. But then he said the bass bar needed to be replaced. So be it. Rene said he'd call me when the job was done, probably within 6 months. So back home in California, I awaited the phone call, counting the months, which finally happened in late spring. I arranged my schedule so I could stay out in the East for a couple of weeks to spend time every day playing the violin with the new bass bar to help it settle. And then I would return to New York City to see Rene so he could make final adjustments. I also took along my Gone violin to show him and have him check the soundpost adjustment. When I got there, the Lupo looked as good as new. But when Rene checked the gone sound post, he came back shocked. He said, "When I loosened the strings, the sound post fell down. And you say the post was put in by Mr. X, a dealer living in Southern California. How can that be since he has such a reputation for repair?" The crazy world of violin repair. I left the gone with him to replace the sound post. So, with the Lupo in hand, I began a 2-week vacation, a vacation trip around the East Coast, playing the violin in hotel rooms 2 hours each day. I played hard, because you got to really work the instrument to make it settle. I never let the violin out of my sight, including taking it with me when I went to museums and the like. When I was in Washington D.C., of course, I went to the Smithsonian and the National Gallery. In each room, the guard would ask me to open the case and let him see the violin. So, back in New York with Rene, he did a final sound post adjustment on both violins before I said goodbye to him. I took an extra hour at the shop to meet Jacques Francais and try out a couple of nice bows he was selling. I was hoping to buy a Francois Tort, but Jacques didn't have one for sale at the time. But he did show me a Picotte, beautiful bow, and I immediately took it from him and started to play. Jacques stopped me and he said, "You're just like Oistrakh. You both just play, play, play. Look at it first. Enjoy the beauty of it." But Jacques agreed with me that the Picotte was not the equal of my Tort pair. So finally back home, I started working on making the Lupo play better. After about a year, I felt that everything about the fiddle was better, but the sound post seemed loose. The responses just weren't right. So I called Rene and made him an offer. "I'll pay your way round trip out here if you come to my living room and adjust the sound post." After some thought, he said, "Yes, I'll do it. I'll give Frankie a call. Maybe I'll stay with him. I haven't seen Frankie for a long time." Depuis longtemps. So the day arrived, and I drove down to San Francisco International, picked Rene up, and took him to my house in Oakland. I sort of gave him the scenic tour, and Rene was effusive with his enjoyment of the beauties of the Bay Area. He'd see a nice house and proclaim, "I'll buy it." Dozens of them. But really, he loved Oakland. After he checked and adjusted the Lupo sound post, I drove him back across the Bay Bridge, seeing dozens of sailboats dotting the beautiful bay's water, over to Frank's violin shop in San Francisco. Little did I know then that it wouldn't be too many years before I made the decision to move on from my French violins and buy a real Italian violin, a Guarneri no less. But that's the story for another video. Thanks for listening, and if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.